This is part of my video series for how to use Roll20.net for playing Warmahordes online. It's kind of a DIY tutorial, so the idea is that the Roll20 doesn't have any official support for Warmachine, but if you set it up right, I think it can be a really great tool. So in this video, what I want to show is table setup. So this is just to give a picture of where we want to be at the end. This is a table that I set up for playing Warmachine on, and the features of the table that we were going to set up are deployment, some markers to show where to deploy, a center line for helping to set up scenarios, some terrain elements, and scenario elements, and also you can add a background image like this to try to make it look a little bit better. So I just want to show, I'm going to do a walkthrough for how to set this kind of stuff up using the Roll20.net tools. So here I'm going to get started and make a new blank table. So create a new game, and we don't need to select any of the settings, just default is fine. So for the free version, you have to wait a couple seconds while this is loading up. So 3, 2, 1, here we go. If I was fancy, I could edit that out. Okay, so now the default setup here is a grid that's set up for playing Dungeons and Dragons. So the grid setup here is not going to work for Warmachine out of the gate. But if you click on the page toolbar tool here, you can edit the settings. And what we want is by default it's a 25 by 25 grid where each unit represents 5 feet. We want a 48 by 48 grid where each square represents 1 inch. And what that will do is make it so that when we're using the ruler, etc., it'll be giving us the right units. So there's also a setting here for whether you want the grid on or off. I don't know if you can see the grid well in the background here, but when you have a grid on, it's really helpful for doing things like setting up scenarios and drawing these lines. But when you actually play the game, you're going to want to go back and turn this off. And the reason is that when this is enabled, things like your tokens and models will snap to that grid, and that's not how you play Warmachine. So we're going to leave those on for drawing the map, and then we're going to turn it off for actual gameplay. So I'll say OK. And so now that we made the map bigger, we're going to have to zoom out a little bit more. Close this. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you're drawing your game board is pick the right layer. So Roll20 has 3 layers. The first one is map and background, second one object and tokens, and third one GM info. We're only going to care about these 2. What you want to do is draw everything that you're setting up in advance should go on your map and background, and the things like your models will go in the objects and tokens. The reason that it's important that they're separated is that when you're actually playing the game, this way you don't accidentally click on part of the map and start dragging it around. You have to explicitly select map and background to be able to manipulate things. So when we're drawing our lines and things, we want to put them on the map layer so that they're not in the way. So just to show how I'm going to draw I'm going to go back and show I want to draw these advanced or the deployment lines. So you're going to select the polygon line tool. Then over here, so the player one's lines are red. So you can count here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So sorry, just to review here, I selected the polygon line tool. So what this is going to do is allow us to click and create these lines 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you shift click, it'll automatically snap it to the corner. So that's good for us here. Click down here. Okay, so that's one line. If you keep clicking, it's actually going to try to make a polygon. So I'm doing undo there. Hit escape at the end of drawing your line, and then it'll flip you out to creating a new one. So this is the regular deployment line for player 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll shift click here. Click again at the bottom. Hit escape. So I'm not going to repeat this for, we could do blue here for player 2, repeat it on this side, and maybe even draw in labels here, like you can use the text tool to write something like 7 inches, maybe make the font a little bigger, like that. So yeah, so these could be guides that just kind of help you know which lines they are. It's kind of boring to watch me draw all those lines, so I'm gonna ignore that for now. I also typically like to, or I like to draw a center line down the middle, and I'm just gonna approximate it here, but um, having a center line will help with scenario setup. So if you're drawing a zone or flags, and then I actually like to draw every 8 inches or every 8 inches some markers so that it makes it easy to find the middle of the table for placing scenario elements as well. So I would do something like that, count down 8, do something like that. So I'm just approximating here, but you can kind of count those out, and I'll show you how you can see those faintly in this picture. So that's the deployment lines. That's going to make it really easy to find where to put your models and get everything deployed accurately at the beginning. So the second thing, after you have the deployment lines in place, the second thing I want to show is adding terrain. So again, there's two different ways you can add terrain. The first one is just drawing it in by hand. So you can use their drawing tools. Here I'm selecting the freehand tool and pick a color that looks kind of foresty. So you can use that to just draw a freestyle polygon. And so this is just an easy way to add terrain. It's not super pretty, but works okay. You could use that same thing. I like to, if I'm doing a hill, I like to use a similar process, but draw some concentric circles. So you can make a hill like this, or like this. So that'll just kind of give you something that looks kind of like a hill. And then similarly, if you want to do a wall, you can use the polygon tool. Draw 1, 2, 3, 4, and close. Escape. So now you have a wall, a hill, etc. So after you play a game, maybe you want to reset your terrain. You should be able to use the select tool here to grab it. This tool doesn't work great if you're at this zoom level for manipulating things. So I'm gonna use this tool to kind of zoom us in. It's easier to grab these handles and things when you're more zoomed in. So use that to rotate it. It should be able to also grab it and drag it. Let's see if my cursor's not changing, but that is doable. Maybe I'll zoom in a little more and see if it'll help me do that. Well, I'm not seeing my cursor change, but in theory you can grab and drag these also. It's not giving me that option right now. Let's try it again here. Yeah, that's what it looks like when you drag them. Yeah, and let's see. Maybe I can even do it with all these. Yeah, drag, rotate, etc. So that way you can reset your table between games. And if you want to get rid of a piece of terrain, you can just use the delete key. Let's see if I do that right. I'll try right click and delete. There we go. Okay. So so you can use that to reset your terrain. And then the last thing I want to show is adding. Oh, actually, sorry. Second way to add terrain is to use images. So if I want to make a prettier forest, I can drag an image from my PC into the board. So now I have an image that I can rotate, resize, drag, so I can make a more realistic looking forest. So that's kind of your preference. One thing that's for the best looking results here, try to look for transparent PNGs. Those are the ones where you're going to be able to, you can see how you can see the grid lines in this square. If you use a JPEG or a non-transparent image, you kind of end up covering things up with white. One other thing I want to show off here is that if you have a terrain element like this that's covering other things up, you can right click and hit to back, and that'll help expose things like your grid lines, or if you had a scenario element on top of a terrain piece, you can send it to the back to help you see what's underneath. So you can use Google image search and search for like forest transparent PNG, and you can probably find some good options. The next thing I want to show is adding scenario elements. So the pieces I want to show are, I'll add a flag. So this tab on the right pane is the image library. You can search in here. I like to use images here because it allows you to precisely set the position and size, as opposed to drawings, which aren't that easy. So because here's an example of where the grid is enabled, and that's making it so that this picture automatically resizes itself to match the grid. Using our markings here, we could, kind of count out and figure out where our flag should go. In this case, I'm going to use this to represent a flag. So now I've positioned it. It snaps to the grid, which is really helpful because it's exactly centered on this measurement, which is what we're going to do in a steamroller setup. And then I can right-click on it, use Advanced, and then Set Dimensions. So because by default this is right now 2 by 2 inches, which is not the right size for a 40 millimeter base. So the correct size is 1.57 inches by 1.57 inches. So I click it, resize, and then now this is a correctly sized 40 millimeter base. If I also wanted to do, if I was doing you could use a similar process for an objective. You might want to put it on the token layer so that you could delete it when it was destroyed. The other thing that you can do is if another scenario element that's common is going to be a zone. So the polygon tool works really well for rectangular zones. I'm going to select transparent for the center because that makes it really easy to, so it doesn't cover anything else up, etc. It's not too noisy. So here I'll just, I'm gonna shift click so that my corners are on the grid, and I'll just approximate how big this zone would be, but you can count it out using the grid lines. So you can use this to just set up a zone anywhere. You can do a similar thing. This I haven't done very much. So you can draw circles as well. So I think if by default this tool is going to make squares, which is not what we want. I think if you hit Alt, you can draw circles. I'm hitting undo there. And then if you want to, I think if I do this, I can snap it to the grid. So I could use this to draw a 12-inch circle as well. So you can use that for setting up scenario elements as well. Oh yeah, so one more thing that you can do is add a background image. So I have one in here that I like called that I had uploaded. So you can put something like this in. I'm gonna have to pick the select tool to change the attributes. Now I can use the set dimensions. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than my table, like 50 by 50 inches. I'm going to use the to back to make it so that it's behind the other things. And then I'll slide it over so that it's lined up right, so that it's covering up my whole table. So I think it looks pretty good. I think it makes it look a little bit less stark to have that background image. But it's kind of a pain. I think so. I'm kind of mixed on whether adding that is a good idea or not. There's a couple of problems with it. One is that unless you pick the right color, it really makes it harder to see your models. So I kind of don't love it for that reason. And also, it makes it really hard to work with the map layer. So you notice I added this at the very end, and it gets that because this is just a map element like any of the other elements, it kind of gets in the way. Like if I want to try to select this forest, like I'm clicking here, and instead of selecting the forest, it's thinking that I'm trying to move that background element. So I just find it so if I'm gonna manipulate the map at all, I probably would just delete this thing and then manipulate the map and re-add it. So it's enough of a pain that I'm kind of mixed on whether I think it's worth it. But I think it does, in terms of looking cool, it does look like nice, and because of the map layer and token layer, it won't interfere with you when you're moving your models around. So it can work. So anyway, this is the end of the tutorial for setting up your map. And one thing that's cool about this is that you don't need to do this every time you play a game, because you can keep this table around. So once you have all of your lines, grids, and everything drawn in, you can just move the terrain around, delete your model tokens, and start a new game on the table. So you're not going to have to repeat this process for every single game you play. So I hope this works well for you guys, and let me know if you come up with any hints or hacks. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks.